At 5:47 in the morning, a military commander stared at a screen and realized something was wrong. His troops had rehearsed this assault for days. The route was familiar. The objective was straightforward. Intelligence suggested the defenders ahead were exhausted, under strength, and vulnerable. Everything about the operation pointed toward a difficult but manageable fight. Then the shooting started. The first burst of gunfire wasn't unusual. What made it unsettling was how fast it came. The lead soldiers had barely crossed an open stretch of ground when rounds tore through the dirt directly in front of them. Men dropped instantly, not because they were hit, but because every instinct told them the enemy already knew exactly where they were. Seconds later, another burst arrived, then another. Each one seemed perfectly timed, as if whoever was pulling the trigger already knew where the next movement would happen before it happened. At first, the commander assumed he was facing a highly trained machine gun crew. Veteran soldiers could sometimes predict movement patterns. Experienced gunners could dominate a battlefield. But this felt different. Every attempt to advance was punished immediately. Every soldier who moved even slightly became the center of attention. It was almost as if the defender wasn't reacting to the battlefield. It was anticipating it. The strange part was that nobody could actually see the shooter. Normally, even the best concealed position gives itself away. A muzzle flash, a silhouette, smoke, something. Yet the firing point ahead appeared almost lifeless. The gun kept firing, but there were no visible soldiers scrambling for cover, no heads peeking over defensive positions, no signs of fear or hesitation. The battlefield felt haunted. Then the truth emerged. Half a mile behind the front line sat a reinforced bunker buried deep underground. Inside, operators watched screens glowing in the darkness. They weren't aiming rifles. They weren't sitting in trenches. They were controlling machines. The gun tearing apart the assault wasn't being fired by a human at all. It was mounted on a robotic platform. Cameras watched every inch of the battlefield. Thermal sensors detected movement through fog and darkness. Software tracked targets faster than human eyes could process them. The machine never blinked, never got tired, never panicked. It simply observed, calculated, and fired. And this was only one machine. Along the front were several more. The attacking force had unknowingly entered a battlefield where humans were no longer the primary defenders. At first, the attackers tried traditional tactics: suppressive fire, bounding advances, coordinated movement. The methods soldiers had relied on for generations. None of it worked. The robots weren't intimidated by incoming fire because they couldn't feel fear. They didn't need motivation. They didn't care about survival. They simply continued executing their instructions with relentless precision. The commander quickly realized he was losing control of the fight. Armored vehicles were ordered forward to destroy the robotic positions. Heavy cannons opened fire, tearing into tree lines and defensive terrain. For a moment, it looked like the machines might finally be overwhelmed. Then something unexpected happened. A small, unmanned vehicle rolled quietly across the battlefield. Nobody paid attention to it at first. It looked harmless, cheap, insignificant. Less than a minute later, it exploded underneath an armored vehicle and transformed millions of dollars worth of equipment into a burning wreck. The battlefield had become an economics lesson. Expensive machines were dying to devices that cost a tiny fraction of their value. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because what happened next wasn't simply about technology. It was about adaptation. Every time the attackers developed a solution, another unmanned system appeared. Drones emerged from hidden positions. Ground robots maneuvered through terrain. Humans struggled to cross. Small autonomous platforms carried explosives directly toward valuable targets. It felt less like fighting an army and more like fighting an ecosystem. Yet no system is perfect. Eventually, the attackers discovered something important. The robots depended on their sensors. Without cameras, thermal optics, and targeting systems, they became far less effective. Suddenly, the battle changed. Precision strikes targeted lenses instead of armor. Drones aimed for optics rather than weapons. One after another, robotic systems began losing parts of their vision. Some became partially blind. Others were forced to rely on backups. For the first time all morning, the machines seemed vulnerable. The commander finally believed he had found a path to victory. If enough sensors could be destroyed, the robotic defense would collapse. But finding a weakness and exploiting it are two very different things. By the time the attackers started targeting optics, they had already spent valuable resources. Vehicles were gone. Ammunition was running low. Drone inventories were shrinking. Every solution required equipment they could no longer easily replace. And while they were solving one problem, another was forming. The robot operators had made a decision. Instead of holding their positions, they would advance. The machines rolled out from defensive cover and moved across no man's land. This was unexpected. Defenders aren't supposed to pursue. Robots certainly weren't supposed to conduct offensive operations through active combat zones. Yet forward they went, across shell craters, through damaged roads, toward enemy positions. The battlefield suddenly entered territory neither side fully understood. The machines reached enemy trenches and began attacking positions that had been designed to stop human soldiers. Some robots provided covering fire, while others carried explosive payloads directly into fortified areas. Defenders found themselves facing opponents who didn't need courage because courage was irrelevant. These machines weren't brave, they simply followed instructions. And remarkably, it worked. Enemy positions began falling. Defensive lines started breaking. Command posts were threatened. For a brief moment, it looked as if the robotic force might achieve a decisive victory. Then reality intervened. The machines weren't running out of determination. They were running out of batteries. They were running out of ammunition. Support equipment was destroyed by artillery. Supply systems were disrupted. Replacement parts never arrived. Suddenly, the greatest challenge wasn't defeating the enemy. It was sustaining momentum. Technology had solved many battlefield problems. It had not solved logistics. The operators watched warning indicators turn yellow and red across their screens. Energy reserves dropped. Ammunition counts shrank. Systems that looked unstoppable minutes earlier were approaching their limits. The attackers recognized this opportunity immediately. Reinforcements were called forward. Fresh troops moved toward the battlefield. If they could survive long enough, exhaustion might finally defeat the machines. Not physical exhaustion, mechanical exhaustion. The clock had become a weapon. But the operators understood that too. Instead of withdrawing, they doubled down. Every remaining asset was committed. Every functioning robot pushed forward. Every available drone launched. Critical positions were attacked. Reinforcement routes were disrupted. Command elements were pressured. The battlefield became a race between collapsing logistics and arriving reinforcements. When those reinforcements finally appeared, they expected to find damaged defenses barely holding together. Instead, they discovered something astonishing. The machines were still there, damaged, low on resources, partially blind, yet still fighting. The new arrivals tried to advance. Gunfire immediately forced them down. They tried to reorganize. The robots adjusted. They searched for weakness. The machines continued operating. Eventually, the commander performed a simple calculation. More reinforcements were too far away. Support assets had already been spent. The defenders still controlled key terrain. Every additional minute increased the cost of continuing the fight. For generations, warfare had depended on breaking human beings. Exhaust them, frighten them, demoralize them, convince them that continuing isn't worth the risk. But these opponents didn't experience any of those things. You couldn't scare them. You couldn't exhaust them. You couldn't convince them to quit. The commander looked at the battlefield and understood he wasn't facing a tactical problem anymore. He was looking at a glimpse of the future. A future where wars might be decided by operators sitting miles away from danger. A future where machines absorb risks once carried by soldiers. A future where victory belongs not to the side with the most courage, but perhaps to the side with the best software, the strongest supply chain, and the fastest ability to adapt. The battle eventually ended, but the larger question didn't. Because long after the smoke cleared, military planners around the world were left wondering about something far more important than who won that day. If machines can fight, learn, adapt, and hold ground without fear, what exactly becomes the role of the human soldier?